Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back. Welcome back to the Hot Mic Podcast. Nate the Barbarian with you. And as always, not alone. Got the regular crew with me, the three amigos. Kevin Aldridge, how you doing, sir?
Good. Happy Friday and happy belated.
I just lost your audio. What happened? As soon as you were about to say Juneteenth, something happened. The heck? Nah, it's gone. I don't. Do you hear him, Phil?
Not now. I don't. I did when he first started.
Yeah. You never should have said Juneteenth.
It could be that God recognized he was about to say something that was, let's just say, inappropriate for a family show, and he just cut off his mic. It's
Not
possible.
Kevin. Not
Well, it's
Kevin.
no, I don't want to bring up past history, but he did slip a bit a couple weeks ago. Not that I would hold it over
Oh,
his head.
okay.
I would never bring it up or hold it over his head,
I'm glad. Yeah.
even though he is a pastor. But to each his own. I mean.
Okay. Can you guys hear me now?
We can hear you now. Yeah.
Okay. All right. I'm not sure what happened there, but I was just saying we'll keep the Juneteenth party going all weekend. That's all I was gonna say.
Absolutely. I mean, what a great thing where for folks who got it like that, they could take off Friday and you got a 4-day Juneteenth holiday. Man, that's beautiful.
Yes,
And
sir.
Trump hates it. Did you see what he posted about wasting time, these federal holidays? He didn't have the stomach to come out and say, I don't believe in Juneteenth. He thinks it's stupid, probably. But he walked straight up to that line, and people were talking about it online.
Yeah, it's not surprising. I mean, I think a lot of the haters on that side of the aisle sort of feel like Juneteenth is a politicized holiday. Of course, Joe Biden, ushered it, ushered it in on the heels of the George Floyd protests and a lot of that sort of thing. So a lot of people view it as nothing but kind of political pandering from the Biden administration, and so that's why they hate on it. But my perspective on it is, national holidays should celebrate significant people and significant events in American history. And what is more significant than the ending of slavery in this country? I mean, you could argue that it is one of the more pivotal moments in the history of our country. And so, why wouldn't we celebrate an end to that? In fact, instead of Juneteenth being a divisive issue, it should be something everybody in America rallies around, just like we rally around the 4th of July and all of these other national holidays, that we put an ugly part of our country's history to bed and our better angels prevail. To me, that's something to be celebrated, not hated on and ridiculed.
Great flow. Let me just say something from a technical standpoint. Kevin, I don't know what you're doing, but whatever you got set up right now let's keep that perfect.
Okay.
Looks good. And
Okay.
you look good too, brother, by the way. Not ashamed to
Appreciate it.
share. Yeah. Phil, any thoughts on that? What you think about Juneteenth? You got to say the right answer.
This is in my humble opinion, this is like a dog whistle. Basically, it, the reason he isn't saying Juneteenth is because he doesn't want to be accused of being a racist or of being a racist. But it's a base. It's a dog whistle. He's kind of putting down the whole Juneteenth thing at this without saying it. So his base kind of loves that stuff. And I noticed in reading about this that he, in his first administration, probably because he was trying to get black votes, he made a special deal of commemorating Juneteenth, and I think he even said he took credit for starting it. I believe. So I mean, this guy is all over the place, and he has no interest in consistency.
Yeah, to say the least. I wouldn't be surprised if in sometime the next 4 years that the Republicans try to rescind Juneteenth as a national holiday. I wouldn't be surprised to see that. Not one bit. That seems to be something that the base really, really loves. They're not worried about making their own lives better, but as long as we can bring back black people or the coastal elites or the liberals, they will sacrifice themselves. That's why I say MAGA. I now know it's a suicide cult. That ends one way for those folks. But let's turn our attention to what happened just last show. So since the last time we talked, I got a chance to watch the rest of the press conference given by Connie Pillage, who was the Hamilton County prosecutor. Since the last time we talked, Fanon Rucker, one of our crew members, he came out and said basically that justice was not done by Connie Pillage's decision to not even take it to a grand jury. He says that basically they're gonna file a suit. The family's gonna file a suit, civil suit. What do you think about what Rucker had to say? You agree with him or disagree with him?
Yeah, I agree with him from this standpoint. Like my personal opinion is, I thought Pillage should have allowed the case to go to the grand jury for two reasons. One, I'm going to say for sort of cynical political reasons, right? She'll deny that politics had anything to do with this, but politics always has something to do with everything, right? The politics, I think, had as much to do with her decision not to send it as it would have if she had decided to send it. I think sending it to the grand jury allows them to make the decision, hey, there is something to see here or there's nothing to see here, and it gets it off her because she can say, hey, sent the case to the grand jury. They said nothing was there. Now it's on the grand jury, which as we know is comprised of, citizens. So it's off her table. By making this wholesale decision, it makes it look like, even I'm not saying this is the case. I'm saying it makes it what it looks like is that once again she is siding with the police against the community. Many in the community who supported her and elected her to be prosecutor, thinking that they would not get results in cases like this, that the process would be allowed to be played out. I said this in the last podcast. People were critical of Joe Dieters, but hey, Joe Dieters at least took a few of these cases took a few of these questionable cases to the grand jury. He didn't get the convictions or the result that the community wanted, but at least he took it a little bit further in the process here. And there was enough questionable about this case that I feel like it should have at least gone to that extra step. So, because of the questionable nature, I think because it would have probably played, you know, took her off the hook with her base, which now she's kind of being somewhat ridiculed and raked over the coals, in that regard. Um, I just think the grand jury would have been the right decision for the community. If the officer was truly innocent, it's justice for him because now he can say, "Hey, it went through the process and I was exonerated. You've got a clean bill." Um, I also don't buy Connie Pillage's rejection of bringing in BCI to also kind of take a look at this. She's like, "Hey, we've got the resources to investigate this." BCI is kind of for agencies that don't have those resources. While that's true on some level, there are plenty of entities that still do have the resources that use BCI. It's not a question of resources, it's about a question of transparency and the appearance of impartiality, right? That's why you bring BCI in, an outside agency in these contested cases where people want to feel like, hey, the fix isn't already in with the local bodies. And so I also had a problem with her contention on that.
Phil, you want to jump in? What's your thoughts?
When I was a prosecutor, I had kind of a personal rule that I would not prosecute someone if I wasn't convinced beyond a reasonable doubt that they were guilty. And there were times when, let's just say, my beliefs, I think, were in opposition to my office at the time. And unfortunately, too many prosecutors' office think that their job is to just put go to court, put the case on, and then let the judge or jury decide. To me, that is reckless and irresponsible. And I think I shared one time about a case I had one time in juvenile court where I listened to their witnesses. When I got up to make my closing argument, I said, "Judge, I'm dismissing. I want to dismiss this case." And he looks at me, he goes, "Why?" Because I am not convinced beyond a reasonable doubt. And the oath of office that we take when you become a lawyer says you will not prosecute anyone unless you believe they're guilty. And so I think it is reckless and irresponsible. If a prosecutor himself or herself doesn't believe the defendant or the accused is guilty, no, it is reckless to take a case in front of the grand jury. I think it's unprofessional. As far as Fanon goes, the pattern in almost all these cases, even the ones where it appears the officer was perfectly justified, they always sue and they usually get a bunch of money. Okay. Now, I don't know if that's just because it's not worth fighting in court or whatever. I'm not minimizing or diminishing Fanon's position, but I'm sure he's not doing this pro bono. I'm sure he's, if I'm wrong, I'll admit it, but I assume, like most of these, he's getting a percentage of this. And with all due respect, he has every right to do that and so forth. But I don't wouldn't call him an unbiased observer.
Yeah, I think that's
Yeah,
fair. I
yeah,
think that's fair on
it's
some level.
somewhat fair, but I think it's somewhat fair. But in the same way that you talked about Connie Pillage and her responsibility as a prosecutor, I think it's somewhat unfair to bring in, to bring in Fanon and sort of talk about the percentages that he's going to get and that sort of thing to somehow suggest that, his belief in the position of his clients is any less valid than Connie Pillage's belief and not moving forward with
I,
with the case. I mean, I would apply politics to Connie Pillage in the same way that you would apply financial profit to Fanon Rucker in this case. I will agree with you. I said from the beginning, this case was always headed for a civil suit, whether he was indicted by a grand jury or not. That part was inevitable. I think the family suing the Cincinnati or the city of Cincinnati or the Cincinnati police force, that was going to happen regardless of whether they got justice in the criminal court or not. I believe that 100%. That is one thing I agree with that Phil said. These cases pretty much almost always may not be 100%, but it's a considerable preponderance of the time. These cases do wind up in civil court with the family generally kind of getting some type of settlement.
and as far as Fanon goes, in fairness, if he did himself, let's say, who took the client, but let's say didn't really believe that there was the officer had committed some kind of a wrong, and again, he's suing civilly, by the way, which is another reason they settle. It's that you don't have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. You just have to prove by a preponderance of the evidence. So if you believe 51% versus 49 that there was liability, then there's liability. So it's a different standard. But if Fanon stood up and said, "I'm representing these people, but I actually don't think the cops did anything wrong," he would be violating his oath of office as an attorney. He is required to advance to 100% advance their interests. Okay, that's he's required to. And it's not that I don't respect his opinion. I'm just being honest here and saying is beside the financial motive, he really has a legal obligation to speak out on their side of the case.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think that lessens his point though. And because I agree with Fanon. I don't think that justice was served in this case at all. I
Well,
think
just because
that
you agree, I mean, I just because you agree, I mean, I'm not saying he doesn't have his a right to an opinion, but I do think you have to evaluate it versus perhaps folks who might be a little more objective. And this thing about whether what she did was
yeah, but I think you're
politically
being unfair to Fanon though. Just to in precisely the way that Kevin said, there are motives on all sides. So the prosecutor has her political motives,
well. Let's
right?
talk about that. Let's
Yeah,
talk about that.
absolutely. We should, because that's my issue. My issue is when I think about this, I can't think of any good reason other than the fact that Connie Pillage is trying to curry favor with maybe law enforcement or some elements of some political spectrum, right? That would want to see her to make a decision like that and not even let it go to a grand jury. There's no good reason behind it.
Now, there's good reasons. Didn't she conclude? Goes back a few days. Didn't she conclude that the Hinton did point his gun at the officer? Wasn't that her
Nope.
conclusion?
She did make that conclusion, but
Mhm.
again, Phil,
Without
I
any
think
evidence.
that I think that her making that conclusion was sketchy as well, because I mean I think
Yep.
the big determiner of this whole thing, and she did her best to try to dance around it, is, she basically was saying that she believed the officer's account that the gun was pointed at him
Basically.
regardless of what the video evidence said. she took his word versus those who looked at that video and said, doesn't look like to us that that gun is being
Well,
pointed
what do you
at.
mean those? What do you mean those? You
I
guys?
mean, there.
Anybody, anybody who
We
watched
talked
the
about this
video.
on the show. Like there's a considerable divide among people who. I mean, if you put 10 people in a room, five of them would say, they don't see the gun being pointed at them. Three or four of them might say, well, it looks to me like they take the police side, and then two or three would say they couldn't tell. And to me, there's enough murkiness there that there's no way that she could say conclusively that the gun was there. She even admitted herself in that
Right.
hey, this thing was taken with a wide angle lens or something like that distorted the camera view. So if that's true, Connie Pillage, how can you say then with any degree of certainty that what you saw was the correct
Or
But
takedown
that was
likewise,
the
picture?
how can
point that
Nathan
I
Ivey
made
say
from
if it's distorted? How can Nathan Ivey say the opposite?
all I can tell you is what I see when I look at the video. And I disagree with you, Kevin. You put 10 people in a room and you run that video, nobody is going to be able to say that they can conclusively see a gun being pointed at the officer. It is not there. There is no evidence whatsoever other than what the officer who think about motive. Who has more of a motive to lie in this situation than the officer that killed a young man? Him. So she took his word. And from what I'm hearing, apparently he might have a sketchy background. I don't have all the details. That's just what people are saying in some circles, to be fair, primarily on social media, that he's got a sketchy background. So, how do you
What?
take the word of an officer with a sketchy background who's got every reason to lie? You take his word over any other evidence? It was very murky. She should have sent it to a grand jury
Well,
for
let's talk about the
precisely
political
but let
motives
me
that
finish
you're.
my point, though. She
Oh,
should have
excuse me.
sent it to a grand jury for precisely that reason. It takes it off of her. It puts it
Yeah,
back on the citizen.
which is a, with
It
all due
puts it back
respect, it's a
on the
chicken shit
it
move.
puts it back
It's a
on the
chicken shit
citizens.
move to do that.
I'm just saying, Phil, it puts it back on the citizens, right? It takes it off of her.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
She
That's why
wanted to
it
be
was
looked
not a
upon in that
political.
light.
Exactly, it takes it off her. And if that's the attitude you want for public officials, okay, it's kind of like Obama when he made this so-called red line that if they use chemical weapons here, he's going to bomb them. And what happened when they did? Well, he didn't want to have the weight on him, so he said, "Well, I'm waiting for Congress," knowing that Congress probably wasn't going to authorize it. But let's look at this issue
I'm not
about the
sure if that's a similar comparison.
all right.
All I'm
Well,
saying is
maybe
that
there are
this is a
others, but
community issue, and so that's why you have juries
a
comprised of
community
people in
issue.
the
What is not a
community.
community issue? What does that mean?
I'm sorry, what's your
Community
question?
issue. What's that
We're
mean?
this is a community issue, like the interactions of law enforcement with members of the
What
community. It's a
isn't every crime or case a community
it may
issue?
be, but that's my point. This is a community issue, so
I
I
don't
would
know
have
what you
no
mean by
problem.
community issue. You define
Let
it.
me finish and you'll hear. This is a community issue. So I would have no problem with a prosecutor sending it back to the jury, to members of the community. I
And
think everybody involved would have a slightly better taste in their mouth, no matter what the grand jury came up with, because at least you took it to a grand jury. That kind of step in a situation like this, with the evidence that we presented, was what we deserved. And she denied that family, and I don't know what her
Oh,
motives
come
are.
on. Come
She
on.
denied that family, Phil. That grieving, believe it or
What?
not, the Ryan Hinton family is grieving as
Oh, I
well.
don't deny that. I don't
Okay, she
deny.
denied that
But
family
you,
any kind of justice.
everybody who commits a crime doesn't have a right to have his case. Well, I'm sorry, that
Yeah,
wasn't a
what were
good.
you about to say? Because that made
That
no
wasn't a
sense
good way to put
whatsoever.
it. What I mean, I was trying to say that there's no duty, okay, to the family of a shooting victim. There's not
It
a
should
duty to
be a
go to
duty to
grand
the
jury.
families of
Okay, but
shooting
let me
victims.
absolutely,
just look at.
Phil.
Let me just look.
That is a horrible statement to make. There's a duty to everybody involved in this situation
It's a
for
duty to do
justice,
justice.
right? There's a duty for
Right. And
justice
she
to
denied
everybody,
justice.
whether you are the, and that's the problem that I have here. And I think that's exactly what Connie Pillage was trying to do in her press conference, which I think is exactly what the defense would have done had this gone to the case. Like you see this all along. Now, look, nobody is defending Ryan Hinton from what he did, right? Assuming that what he was accused of was actually the truth, right? We know he had
But
a
it wasn't the
gun.
truth though.
We know he had a gun. We know he was in a stolen car. So he was going to face charges around those things had he been arrested and had an opportunity to get his day in court, which I absolutely wholeheartedly believe would have been justice for that young man to be alive and to face the crimes he would have been accused of. And I would have been calling for him to have the same experience that I'm calling for this officer to have, that a jury of his peers or a judge, he should go before it, have the opportunity to try to defend himself, to argue his case, and to be prosecuted. That's how justice looks in this country. And so just because he is accused of a crime doesn't mean that he nor his family are not entitled to the same due process
I
and
didn't say
justice.
that. I didn't say that the right way. What I was saying, what I was trying to say, and excuse me, is if every time someone is shot or assaulted, whatever, it doesn't and if someone is charged, it doesn't automatically mean that has to go to the grand jury. There's something to call. I talked about the duties of a prosecutor. Okay, I won't go through that again, but I think the assumption that you guys are making, or at least Nathan is to a degree, is that Connie Pilch's act was politically motivated. It was based
It,
on politics,
that's what I believe.
not justice. Okay,
Yeah.
first of all, what I found in my years on city council, county commissioner, everything, is anytime somebody has a strong political point of view, they always attribute political motives to the other side. They always do. You take any issue, I don't care if it's pro-life or any of these things. Oh, the other side it's just doing it for politics. I heard this all the time. Now, let's look at the politics. I am not necessarily convinced that it was to her political advantage to not send it to the grand jury. Okay, now if it was a Republican prosecutor, that might be a fair accusation because his voter support is more certainly more comprised of kind of more law and order people. But in her
Everybody's law
situation,
and order.
in her situation, had she sent it to the grand jury, or even if she had charged the officer, there are people who can say, well, she's playing to the black community. She's not
No,
doing justice. So,
no,
I would just say
that's not true.
I don't necessarily believe that it was to her, whether it was or not, I don't know, but I don't know that it was to her political advantage,
It,
given her Democratic base,
it
not
depends
to
on
Yeah,
take him to
I
the
would
grand
agree with
jury.
that. I would agree with that, Phil. It was not to her political advantage with her base, and she's paying that price, I think,
Yeah,
already in some circles. But
yeah.
here's where I think the politics did come in, is that she has been under tremendous scrutiny and criticism, as all Democrats have, about being soft on crime. Right? That's been her thing. That's been the thing that she's
I
been
see. It's
beating
been a
over the.
thing for every prosecutor. They're
Well,
all
sure,
worried
sure,
about that.
yeah, but it's not. But it wasn't. Nobody was talking about being soft on crime when Joe Dieters was the prosecutor. That was never
Yeah, but
said. So let's
that's
so
because he
let's
made
let's
sure
let's
of
quit
how
that.
he
Let's quit
acted.
that right now. The rap on Democratic, whether it's Democratic judges or whether it's Democratic prosecutors, when you talk about the legal system and Democrats and liberals as a whole, they are tagged and labeled as soft on crime. And that was what Melissa Powers ran against her on. You can't trust her. She'll be soft on crime. She'll let the criminals out and run the streets. She's not pro police. That was the rap on her.
that's the
And
reason why
so,
Fanon
and,
wasn't prosecutor.
and so you can't tell me. I mean, look, Connie Pillage is human, just like everybody else. And you hear that stuff enough, that factors in to your decisions. Connie Pillage is not some robot who's above those types of things getting into your head and influencing you. And I absolutely think that it might not have been the determining factor in why she went the way that she did, but you're not going to convince me it wasn't a factor that
It
that
certainly
had she
was.
that had she done that, they were gonna the right and the police supporters were gonna rake her over the coals, and she didn't want that smoke.
So now she's being raked over the coals by the black community. Agreed.
Yeah, but she can weather that. She can
Oh, okay.
weather that.
She can weather that. Okay.
She can
Well,
It's
weather
it's
that. She can weather that
it's
because
harder to weather a full out assault from organized law enforcement, the
not for a
police union.
Democrat. Not
yes,
for a Democrat. Let me tell you a story. Let me tell you a story.
Yeah, but
I served in the prosecutor's
isn't she
office.
the first Democrat in a long time?
100 years.
Yeah. Oh
Okay,
yeah.
then. So
Oh yeah.
that's not like a she's on thin ice. This is
Well,
an audition.
every office in the county is now Democrat, except maybe the engineer. So it's not that thin. It's very, very hard for
We
a
would have to get
Republican
more
to get,
data.
excuse me, it's
We
very
would have
hard
to
for a
get more
Republican to get
data to
elected in
say.
Hamilton County. Very
But can
hard.
you agree with this, that we'd have to get more data to say that this is anything other than a statistical anomaly when it comes to the Hamilton County prosecutor's office? That's different. That's perceived
No,
differently.
it's not different. Why do you think she won? Because Republicans can't win in Hamilton County. They can't. When I was there, it was all Republican. Now it's all Democrat.
I'm not
So
saying that I don't believe you. I'm just saying that if we really want to be concrete, let's see what happens with the next 2-3 elections. Is this an anomaly
okay,
or is it a trend?
well,
Right now,
it's
it's an
obviously
anomaly.
a trend. You can go back 20 years, and it is a trend. There's no question. It is no
Not with the
question.
Hamilton County prosecutor's office, though, Phil. That's what we're
Oh,
talking about.
that's because Joe Dieters was a very, very shrewd politician, raised millions and millions of dollars. But
Which
yes,
means,
it is a
which
trend. I got news. I don't care what office. It is a clerk of courts. I don't care what. They're all Democrats and have
I
been for
disagree with you.
years.
The Hamilton County prosecutor's office is viewed differently. That
Here,
office is psychically connected to the way people feel
Let me
about
share
being
something.
safe in the county.
here's where I'll agree. I'll agree with Phil on this. I will agree with him on this. Is that the truth of that the county is becoming bluer is absolutely a fact. I mean,
We
even if you
already know
look
that.
at, I mean,
That's not in doubt.
even if you look at, and I might have tended to agree with you on the prosecutor until this most recent election. I agree with Phil. Joe Dieters was a particularly shrewd politician in a way that Melissa Powers was not. And let's not forget, there were a lot of black folks who they won't. There's some who won't admit it, but there were a lot of black people who voted for Joe Dieters too. There were a lot.
You're making my point.
Joe Dieters got cross support, okay, because of who he was, his long tenure. He did some things, so he was a different animal than Melissa Powers. When you think about it in the law enforcement
He was a
ranks,
man. That was the difference. He was a man. Trust me on that.
maybe
Right.
that's a part of it. But I
I'm
think
not disagreeing with anything you're saying.
when you
All I'm
see how
saying is that if we're going to look at this from a fair level, I hear what you're saying. I know all that's true about the county, but I still view the Hamilton County's prosecutor's office as different. I have yet to see a Democrat win in successive elections. And until I do, I won't believe it until I see it. I don't care
that's
what the
fair.
trends are.
Can I
We
share
live in a
something
wacky
about
world.
my experience? When you say that, oh well, you're saying that she is particularly on thin political ice.
She was on thin
Uh,
ice the day she got
yeah,
elected as a
okay.
white
Well,
female
no,
Democrat in
again,
that
we
office.
can
Yes.
argue that, but not given the blueness of the county. However, I can just tell you, when I was a prosecutor, this is pre Joe Dieters. He actually was only there like the last year or two I was there, and I won't say the name of the prosecutor, but these were the days when a Democrat couldn't win in Hamilton County. In other words, it was almost a sure thing, especially for the prosecutor. I was amazed, though, how paranoid this prior prosecutor was, how paranoid he was about anything that would suggest he wasn't law and order. Okay, I mean, I sometimes tried to get a plea, somebody to a plea on something, and and the fact that I might say it's really unfair for this guy to go to prison or it's on this and that. Oh, no, no, we can't risk a story that says he's weak on crime. And this is a guy who almost had no chance of losing. So my point is that this thing about, oh, she's on a different situation. She's got to be careful that she seems law and order. No, I mean the fact of the matter is what every prosecutor is always that's always on their mind.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think that.
that's fair. I think that's a fair. I think that's a
Yeah,
fair point. I mean, there's no less pressure on a Republican to toe the law and order hard on crime line than it is a Democrat.
no, it's more
But I
pressure on
would
the
say
Democrat.
a Republican doesn't come into the office with that rap. That's sort of what's expected, that they're going to be hard charging coming in and follow that line. Democrats don't enjoy that luxury of coming in with that perception, and Connie Pillage certainly didn't.
Yeah, Connie Pillage she denied justice to the Ryan Hinton family, and she put herself in the crosshairs for elements in the primarily black community. I
So
would
she
look at
went
it.
against her political interests, is what you're saying.
No, that's not what I'm saying.
You just said
Not
she
at
went
all.
against the wishes of the black community. Isn't that an important part of her base?
It sure is.
It wasn't an important part of Joe Dieter's or his predecessor's base.
It
It,
sure is.
it,
I would have to
it,
believe it
to some
is.
degree, there was crossover, but by and large, his base was law and order. Her
Yeah, but
base is different. So when you say she did it and she's now encountering a lot of pushback from the black community, I would say you could argue that it was a fairly forthright decision,
yeah, you
given
can
that it
argue
went
that.
against her political interest
It
to a
most certainly
Here,
did
degree.
not.
here's why. Here's
It
why.
most
Here's
certainly
why
did not go
Phyllis.
against her political interests, and there's one reason why. Because it always serves you. It always serves you, especially as a prosecutor, but really as any politician, to appear to be pro law enforcement. It always serves you. I don't care if she's a Democrat or a Republican. Not having police unions forming Voltron on you and coming after you is always in your best interest. And I'm sure she got a lot of pressure from local law enforcement in some subtle and not so subtle ways, right? And because it just doesn't make any sense. And then all this stuff you said earlier, Phil, about you would never bring a case. I mean, I hear you, but
That was
there are
me.
many
That
times I'm
wasn't the
sure.
policy of the office, just so you're clear.
Yeah, okay. So it wasn't policy. I hear what you're
Was not a
saying, but in
was not a policy of the office.
yeah, I hear what you're saying. It wasn't a policy of the
Yeah.
office. But in this case, I think the best decision for everybody involved would have been to send it to a grand jury. If the grand jury finds something, they find something. To me, it felt like she was trying to shield the officer because the case was so murky. Now, if there was incontrovertible video evidence that Ryan Hinton had pointed a weapon at the officer, okay, I get it. But there is not in she's up there talking like there's incontrovertible evidence. There's no evidence whatsoever, except with the man who has the most to gain from lying about it. That's Officer A. And oh, by the way, why don't we know who this officer is? What is this Marcy's law where now officers can kill citizens in what looks to be really shaky kind of circumstances, and we don't even know their names? We got ICE agents picking up people and ghosting them with masks on. And then locally, we don't even know who the officer is that killed a citizen under very questionable circumstances.
But you know what though, Nathan? This is what I always say. Elections have consequences. And you know why this Marcy's law is in existence? Because your state house in Columbus and the elected officials there in Columbus made this a state law to where and they were lobbied by police departments and law enforcement officials to this law for this very reason is that these officers did not want to face the scrutiny and everything that comes with this from these types of cases. And so they'll claim to be victims of crimes so that any documentation related to them can be withheld from the media and from the public so that he gets to lie low underneath the surface unless you actually know who he is. And there's some people who know. Fanon knows who it is. And he was, in fact, the one who I believe, if I'm not mistaken, initially leaked the information about this officer having complaints that have appeared before the Citizens Complaint Authority before. And so Fanon and the defense, they know exactly who this guy is. Now, clearly, he's towing the legal line here because he hasn't said who that officer is. He knows who he is, but I'm assuming he's not saying it because that would probably be some violation of this law if he made it public, and perhaps he's not wanting to subject himself or his firm or whatever to whatever legal action would come if he were to actually release that information, or I don't know if he's bound by some type of confidentiality from the case. I don't know. But I say that to say this is why it's important who you elect to go to Columbus, because these are exactly the type of laws that get passed, say like necessarily under the cloak of darkness, because they're doing a lot of these things out here in public. People just aren't paying attention until it comes up like this. And then they're like, well, how are they able to do that? Because it's the law. It's the law in Ohio.
Yeah, I'm going to say it again. I keep saying it. You cannot trust Republican legislative majorities. They do not care about the people. They care about consolidating your money under their umbrella so they can give it to private schools, so they can give it to billionaires. They're about basically turning local law enforcement into secret police. You got this Marcy's law. They're right now. the governor probably signing. He gonna sign a law
Nate, the one thing
where
about you and I want to compliment, you never exaggerate.
yeah, I never do. I keep it real. So they're about to sign a law now that'll make it even more difficult and more expensive to get documentation about police cases. Why are they creating a secret police? But you got dumb people running around talking about transgenders and the gays. And meanwhile, these Republicans are stealing your rights and creating a police state. And you're going to wake up one day and say, how did this happen? And it's happening right now. Get in the game, know what's going on, get involved with friends and family. You got to have a zero policy, zero tolerance. You got to get out here if you want to be associated with me. If you ain't voting, I got nothing to say to you. Friends, family, it's that serious. It's that serious to me because you're going to wake up and realize the country that you thought you had is completely gone, and it's going to be white male Republicans behind it. Sorry to say it, Phil. Not really sorry, but it is what it is. It's white male Republicans. That's what it is.
Well,
Yeah. Robbing us blind. You want to take my money, don't put it back into the public school system that produced me and give it to your buddies that's got these private schools. There's no oversight, and we think that's American. How do you kill somebody, even if it's on the line of the duty, and your name is not in the paper? I don't know. When I drive by police now, I'm like a little bit more tense because they might think I'm running from them. They might think that my phone is a gun. Who knows what could happen? It's crazy out here. And you're right, Kevin. It comes back to people in Ohio falling asleep. They want you to think your vote doesn't matter. Meanwhile, they're telling the people that support them to get out there and vote. So I got zero tolerance for black people, especially that don't vote. I don't even got nothing to talk to you about. We're not the same. You know what I'm saying? The days of talking about cartoons are over with. You know, you could talk about that with somebody else. I got enough people to talk about sports with in my life. I want to talk about politics and what's going on. Kevin got frozen. Kevin was frozen. Phil, it's just me and you now.
I've told you before, I can handle being Kevin. That's the usual left. As I said, it's the usual left wing militant. Oh, sorry, Kevin. Didn't know you were back. Sorry.
But can you handle being you,
sorry
though?
about that.
The real question is, can you handle being you? That's the question.
No, actually, it's very difficult, to tell you the truth.
You want to be Kevin.
Especially
I want
with you
to be
guys.
you.
It's very difficult being me.
Oh, my God. I read that there was a man. There was a man who got his weapon was stolen by Ryan Hinton and the people that were with him. His gun was recovered in the stolen vehicle. And then I read he lost his job. Apparently, he's a security officer somewhere in northern Kentucky. You guys read about this? And he didn't follow the right procedure in terms of storing his weapon. It got stolen.
Storing? He left the gun in the car.
I know, and apparently that was against company policy. And I thought, wow,
I wonder why.
I mean, if that's their policy, that's their. If you're a security professional, I get it on some levels. It's a harsh thing because all he did was just get his gun stolen. But I mean, should there be harsher penalties for people that allow someone to, like, if you leave your gun in a car? I don't. Maybe it's a bad question, actually. I don't even think it's a question that we should go down, like, because I can't blame citizens for that. Somebody steals my gun, am I responsible for what they do with it? No, they stole it from me.
Well, I think the side of that argument is, and police. I mean, they talk about this all the time about gun safety, right? Like that's a huge issue, and one of the things about responsible gun ownership that we talk about is people need to make sure that their guns are locked and secured. Now, if you work in the security industry or lo and behold, law enforcement, you absolutely need to make sure that you're adhering to those safety protocols. So yeah, there should be some scrutiny. I mean, look, let's not forget our own Hamilton County sheriff had this exact same thing happen to her where she let not only did she have her gun stolen, I think they took her card as well. So, I mean, look, and some people tried to make an issue out of that during her reelection campaign. It didn't land, and it didn't land, and
It
obviously
should have landed.
she got reelected. It didn't stick, but I think if you're going to have this question about whether this guy should be fired or not, I mean, if he got fired from his job as a just being as a security guard, I mean, you could If I was him, I'd be making the case. I'd be saying, "Hey, we got our top law enforcement officer in the county didn't
Yeah,
even lose his
I
job
mean,
behind the same thing."
yeah, you guys are talking about the red versus blue. I mean, if there's one thing that attests to the blueness of this county, Kevin said, it's the sheriff who leaves her gun out, gets her car stolen. She still gets reelected. That doesn't say something about political makeup. I don't know what does.
Yeah, look, old I think who was it, Jim Neal, who was a converted, you know, Republican who converted from Democrat to Republican. He tried to make it stick. He couldn't, he couldn't make it, couldn't get any traction with that.
I think it says something about the quality. I think it says something about the way people thought about Charmaine McGuffey. But I thought the thing was reflective of. I think that was primarily the reason why she got reelected. People were like, "Yeah, that was messed up," but I think she's doing a good job. And then I think it was a reflection on her challengers that were just terrible, terrible. It would have been terrible for the county. So, but I get it. I get it. Let's talk about the Citizens Complaint Authority. I sent you guys a link. Looks like there are some concerns about one of the members that's been using some extreme language. He's one of the police complaint board members, and his name is William J. Burkwinkle. And apparently, he used the F word 17 times. He used a racial slur. He was trying to make a point and also talking about some of the evidence of the cases that come before them. Matter of fact, I think I've got an image right here that I can grab for you and show you. Yeah, I'll grab it here for you in a second. Um, and I read through the article. It just seems like he's someone. And again, I could read this wrong. Maybe you got a different handle, but it seems like he was someone who kind of like maybe on the pro police side, and he was kind of making a point like, here we are talking about officers using the N word, and then
They
we got
shouldn't allow anyone who's pro police on that board.
right. Well, that's how it kind of came across to me. Is that how you felt about it when you read it, or what'd you think?
Me?
Well, he's
Yeah,
definitely one of the more pro police members, I think, of the group, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I think on a board like the Citizen Complaint Authority, you should have a mix of perspectives in there, right? That I think that's how you get good
right,
conversation and good conclusions is by
right.
having. But from the sources that I've talked to, I don't know Mr. Burwinkle myself, but from the sources I know who know of him and who have worked with him, he does have a pro police lean, and I think his whole impetus in this situation was to kind of sort of say, uh, by using the F bomb 17 times or whatever, I think was to try to make the case that, hey, this is kind of common language today. So police officers using it is no big deal, right? Like he was trying to diminish the impact of the conversation that folks were having around police officers' use of that particular word or that particular type of language. So he was trying to make that point by uh, using various quotes and even making reference to the rap group NWA and all of that sort of stuff, as if to say, hey, this is out in the public lexicon. There's nothing to see here. It's no big deal, right? In defense of the police. And um he went a little overboard with it. Look, I'm not beyond even myself occasionally using a colorful word for emphasis, right? But
Yeah,
17
we're aware of
yeah,
that. We're
I
aware.
wanted to beat you to the punch on that, Phil, because I knew you were gonna. I knew you had that locked and loaded.
Oh,
I
I
knew you
wasn't
had
going
it
to
locked
say
and
it
loaded.
anymore.
So
I
I
wasn't.
wanted to take that. I wanted to take that little steam from you before you could get to it. But there's nothing. People use it for emphasis, but 17 times was a bit of overkill. Not to mention that his point was a bad one. Look,
You didn't use
I've
it
said
that many times, for example.
right. His point was a bad one. Look, if you work in any kind of public service capacity, whether that's working the checkout at McDonald's or protecting and serving as a law enforcement officer, how you speak to the people that you serve matters. And nobody should be cussed at if you are in a position of being a public servant. I doubt if Mr. Burwinkle went to McDonald's and the cashier told him to sit his F and A down and wait for his food. I don't think he would. I don't think he would think that wasn't a big deal, right?
Right.
And so when a police officer is cursing at you in an already intense and stressful situation, That to me is just not appropriate. The use of the N word is not appropriate. Black or white police officer, I've been 100% 10 toes down on that. If you use that type of language, I've said that I think it ought to be terminable language, not even a second chance. But certainly using curse words and things of that nature maybe shouldn't be terminable, but it certainly shouldn't be something that is allowed or encouraged. That there should be some sort of discipline for officers who use that type of language. Let's just take the Hinton video. I thought one of the things that made that look even more malicious on behalf of the officer was when after he fired, he dropped the F bomb. You know, he dropped the F bomb a couple of times. Go back and listen to that video or watch that video. You can get the F down. And I'm like, why is that even
That's a
necessary?
pretty traumatic situation. I
I
think
get
he
it's a,
deserves
hey
a little
Phil,
grace there.
I get it's a traumatic situation, but that's endemic. Like people use that type of language. People who use that language cavalierly like that, like that's a part of his lexicon. I think if he was just arresting him, he would have used that same language. And I've seen officers on video use curse at people before in those in less stressful situations than that. So Mr. Burwinkle's point was
That's
a
much
bad
less
one.
excusable, Kevin, than a guy, an officer who's in a potential life and death situation. I think there's a
Look,
big
I'm just
difference.
saying it's not a good look under any circumstances, under any situation. And I think that the message needs to be in law enforcement and in any area where you're serving the public that that type of language toward the people you serve is unacceptable, period.
Right.
If you wouldn't take it from a McDonald's cashier, why do I need to take that from a police officer whose tax dollars I pay?
You know, as far as this guy, whatever his name is, Burwinkle, it kind of reminds me of this parable that Jesus told, saying that the tongue is like the rudder of a ship. It's very small, but it steers the entire ship. And I think that was a clear example of how our words matter. And for this guy, I don't care what the circumstance were, to throw out all those words. I mean, it's just, it just comes across horribly. It really does. And I'll excuse the officer for his vocabulary at the time of that shooting, but the case, the underlying case that the board was going over was an officer who was basically saying "effing you." He wasn't under a violent situation. He was just kind of lost his temper, which is, I agree with Kevin. That's inexcusable.
Phil is dead wrong on this. Like it's just amazing, and I love the example that you made, Kevin, about going to fast food, uh, patronizing a fast food establishment and what you expect from in terms of customer service. Because we, you got it completely backwards, Phil. That's exactly when I want you to
What is
be.
the point of mine you disagree with? I made a couple.
I'm
What's
just
your
saying when you're in a high stress moment, that's exactly when I want you to be your most professional, not the opposite. Just because you pulled your weapon out, now you can curse because I
All right,
understand it's a tense situation.
let me just
No.
say something. I've noticed a tendency in myself, and I have to confess this, that when something happens to me, like who knows, I bump my head, I drop some, whatever it is, I have a tendency to go, oh, F. Okay? That's what I have a tendency to do. Now, is it right? No, it's not right. But it's a little more excusable than if I'm just talking to somebody and I say, hey, what the heck F are you doing?
Yeah,
Kind of
but
thing.
those don't even yeah, we're talking about two completely different scenarios. We're talking about a man with a gun who's been given the power of law telling you to get the F down. That's a reflection of who he is as a person. That's a reflection of his character, and it's a reflection of how he viewed that situation. Right. I'm glad. Yeah, absolutely. It says something about who he is and the way he viewed Ryan Hinton. It wasn't about protecting himself, it was about getting down. That's why he
That's
shot
that
him.
that's absolutely Phil. And I'm not again, I can't get into this officer's head, but as somebody watching that, hearing that language made me feel a certain kind of way about his level of aggressiveness, right? Like that's aggressive language in an aggressive situation, and it made it seem it just wasn't a good look. It made him seem a little more aggressive and a little more malicious, maybe even than he actually was, or it might have been a reflection of exactly where he was and how he was thinking. But either way, that's even more of a reason not to use that. And stubbing your toe and saying "oh" and using an expletive is very different than that situation.
Right. Then you're in a power dynamic where you have the power and you got a weapon drawn. It says something about you. And it goes to show. And again, I saw this from the first clip. I don't
Well,
know
the other
why
guy had a
this
weapon
wasn't
too, so
hard.
I'm not sure it's quite that much of an imbalance.
It wasn't hard to see all of this. You watch the video, and now we realize now that see at first when the first video came out, we thought that they were leaving some stuff out. That was all they had, nothing. So shame on Connie Pillage. I look at her differently, and I hope that she has a qualified Democrat challenger. And then we're also learning some things as a community. I haven't done the research on this, but Connie Pillage, when she was running to become Hamilton County prosecutor, she went to all the NAACP. She went to all these forums. I don't know if anybody asked her about what she would do if there was an officer involved shooting. But if they haven't asked her and she wasn't asked a question about what she should do, that should now be a question that we ask Hamilton County prosecutors moving forward. Use this case as an example. What would you do? Would you send it to the grand jury? What would you do and demand an answer and don't let them yabba dabba do and Scooby Doo away from it? And then secondly, it's just a wake up call to the lack of focused political power from the Black community here in Greater Cincinnati. Because if we had the ability to flex more, I believe we probably would have got a different outcome. But we are where we are. We are where we are, unfortunately. And
Yeah, I think I don't disagree with questioning politicians, but again, this is the cynical, maybe the cynical journalist in me, because I've seen it too many times. Is politicians say what they need to say in the moment, and unfortunately for voters, you never really truly know what a candidate is going to do, particularly one that doesn't have a track record in a particular arena, until they actually get in there, and then you've got their actions. Actions always speak louder than words. That's why you got to watch what people do, not necessarily what they say, right? Because a politician will say anything, on the campaign trail, or under the lights. I'm more interested in seeing how you what you do, and what you do and how you handle situations tells me more about you than anything that you'll say in a press conference, or in an interview, or during a public forum under the questions. Of course, you're going to say what is necessary in front of the audience. You give them what they want to hear. But clearly, County Pillage didn't give folks what they wanted to hear at that presser on Tuesday, or at least the majority, or at least some of her constituency.
yeah, in the Hamilton County coroner as well. The press conference that she gave. I know this wasn't on topic, but I want to make this point very quickly. Her performance in her press conference was downright despicable. I don't know what was going on with her. At times, she seemed flippant. The energy and the vibe was all off. And at some point, there was a local reporter that asked her a question as she was giving the information about the path of the bullet. And so the office, I mean, the reporter sort of putting it all together. He's like, so what you're saying is that he was shot in the back. And rather than answer the question, she offered up some flippant comment about, you'll have to Google it. I'm like, what? Wait, Google? You're the Hamilton County coroner. Why would I have to Google it? I'm asking you a question. I didn't like the way she was yabba dabba doing and dancing around it. The vibe was all off. This Ryan Hinton case has exposed a corner to me and Connie Pillage and anybody else that like them. And that's just how I feel about it, right, wrong, or whatever. And I hope that she gets a qualified Democrat because I would love to see that. And I think that these forums are very important. They're very, very important. You've done a billion of them. You know how it is. If
Yeah.
you have an opportunity to get them on the record about what they might do in the future. Now they might change it, but at least we now that we can't trust you because you've been asked a question. And sometimes I go to these forums, I feel like it was just a waste of time. A bunch of dumb questions that don't go anywhere and don't mean anything just to fill the time. A really good question with an experienced person asking a question who can follow up can yield a lot of benefits to people who are trying to make decisions about these candidates before we vote on them. And just in my opinion, in my
Yeah,
opinion.
I think one thing to remember too, and in fairness to sort of Connie Pillage, is it's early, right? She's not even a year into her term yet, and this is her first real test case. She's going to have, unfortunately, probably at least two or three more instances, if not more than that, where she's going to come up against, some case that is going to, um, be a police against the community type case or something that's going to come to bear. And so I think what she will ultimately be judged on, like if the election was to next month, I would say she might be in a bit of trouble, but she won't be up for election re-election for some years now, and that is time for her to smooth over and for other things to happen and for her to make decisions that can maybe repair some of that damage that folks might be feeling right now. Doesn't mean that she won't have a challenger who might bring this situation up and try to bring it, but a lot will depend on not just this, but what she does moving forward. Now, if she has another one of these or another couple ones that don't land right with the community, she probably won't get back at re-election time.
You're right, man, because people have short attention spans. You're right. A year or two, who knows what Trump is doing? Our brains will be collectively somewhere completely else. And then she might have a case where she kind of exonerates herself. What I fear is that her actions are going to give officers in Cincinnati the impetus to do the same thing in the same scenario. Because they're like, well, I'm not going to go to the grand jury. She's just going to make a decision and it's going to be in my favor because I told her that. And I just feel like we've learned that is just bad business, in my opinion. But it is what it is. And this man on the Hamilton County, the man on the Citizen Complaint Authority, he needs to be kicked off. Burwinkle, he needs to go. He needs to go because I agree with the fact that I think we need to have different opinions. And so if you have somebody that leans more pro police on that board, great. But this man doesn't have any class. And some of the points he made about, so at some point he's talking about the hip-hop group NWA, which everybody calls it NWA. Nobody calls it by its whole name. Even black people call it NWA called it NWA. But this non-black man thinks he knows us, is sitting in this meeting getting paid whatever he's getting paid to be on that board by
$100. I think he gets $100 a meeting. He's not getting rich.
I thought there was
off it.
$100 a meeting for the park board, as I read. I didn't think it said.
Oh, okay.
$100.
You're probably
he's
right.
on the park board too.
It may be volunteer. I don't know.
It may be volunteer, but whatever he's getting, he don't deserve it because the point he made was utterly ridiculous. How's he gonna tell black people that the N-word don't have an impact because they use it in rap songs? What in the hell? I mean, that right there alone tells me that he doesn't have the right mentality, and I don't trust his decision making. He should be removed immediately. We need pro police person there. It should be a balance. I agree with. He ain't it because he don't even have the professionalism, the gravitas, the dignity or respect to not say what he said in public. The fact that he said that says something about him. And to me, it says that he is not qualified. Maybe he's getting older and he's losing a grip with reality. Whatever it is, they need to put him out the pasture.
Hey, listen, I'm getting older and I'm losing.
I'm getting older too.
And I don't
I'm getting older too, but I'm not that old. I'm not gonna say dumb stuff like that at trying to make a point. And this is a serious position, and this is what you're bringing to the table.
Hey, Nathan,
I mean, God, why do we have to keep dealing with mediocre white men in these positions?
You know what, Nathan? You know why he said that? You know why he used.
Hey, I threw that last little bit in there just for a fact.
Is he a DEI appointment? That's what I want to know.
He's a DEI.
Yeah.
There you go,
So
Phil.
you know why he said it, Nathan?
By the way, have you guys seen that video I sent you, White Flight, about the ratio, the flights? It was a Daily Show thing. I sent it to you. Did you watch it?
I don't think I did.
Oh my gosh! Go on YouTube and just type in Daily Show White Flight. I sent that to you guys because you guys would like it. You got to watch it.
Okay, I'll check it out. What were you saying, Kevin?
So no, I said you know why the guy said it, right? He said it because he wanted to, right? Like he wanted to use the N-word. That was the reason why he used it. It wasn't just to make a point. Well, I mean, it was primarily to make that point, but he wanted to be controversial, and he said it because he wanted to, and he wanted to get that off. That was the reason why he said it primarily. And he suffers from the same thing that I think, most white people who don't get it, who don't get the culture, who don't get the culture and who don't understand it. They are infatuated with the N-word and this use of the N-word, particularly by black people. And their retort is always, well, why can't we use it? Well, go ahead. You can use it. Go ahead and use it. But they don't want to use it because they know what comes with it with when they use it, which should explain to them the answer to their own question about why they can't use they know the answer to that question, but they just want to on some level be able to get the permission to use it. And so that's where Mr. Burwinkle was coming on that. He saw this as his prime opportunity to try to make his little point and get the N word off because he wanted to say it. And it's as simple as that.
And you're right about that, and that is immature. It's not the level of maturity that you should be bringing to a board of that nature, and he should be removed. That ain't the place for that. That's the kind of stuff you do with your buddies, or maybe you're in some crazy chat room or Facebook page. Not when you're sitting on the Citizens Complaint Authority. Why is this tolerable? Why is this? There is no way in the world that if I was mayor, he would have been gone already. We don't have
Does the
time
mayor
to
have
play
the
with
right to
you.
remove? Does the mayor have a right to remove him? I know they
I don't
appoint.
know. I don't know.
He
That's a
does.
good
I think. I
question.
think the. I think the mayor appoints the members. If I'm not mistaken, I think the mayor appoints the members of the Citizen Complaint
Yeah.
Authority. And in fact, I think he's got a meeting scheduled with the mayor because the mayor wants to have a
He
little
gotta go.
conversation with him about his language.
He gotta go, go, go. You are an embarrassment to what we got. We are serious about the work we doing. We're not playing. We're not children. Take these little games of your Facebook posts and go to Fox News with it. Whatever you got to do, take that over there. Grown people are doing grown people stuff over here. Gee, what is going on with the people, man? We must
I
be
mean, and if
living in
you
the last days.
and I don't know what Mr. Burwinkle's background or credentials is, or who he knows that allow him to land a seat on this board, but he is definitely an older white man of a particular type. And I'm not saying that there aren't places for that, but I'm just like, man, get you some younger, fresh blood on that board, and go from there.
Hey, maybe you should appoint. Hey, guys, maybe you should appoint me to it. Granted, I am an older white man. What was the
Yeah,
third thing that?
No,
Phil, we
no,
don't need you. We
mm-mm,
need get some younger, fresh blood
Oh! Thanks a lot.
no,
That's age
on those
discrimination. You
boards.
get sued for that.
no, Phil, no, no, no. You go in there.
Another ambition of mine crushed.
We will
We
fall
we
completely out.
we
Completely
don't
out.
need it. We don't need any 60s and 70s throwbacks. We need to get some.
Throwbacks.
I don't need anybody who was around during Jim Crow representing these days on the let's get some fresh blood.
So another topic. So one of the most difficult things for me to do right now is to watch the White House press conferences because Carolyn Levin, who is Trump's White House press secretary, is completely unsufferable. I watch her and I'm thinking, why? Why do we have to do it again? Yet another white woman standing up there charged with trying to make sense out of Trump's nonsense, trying to make this weak man seem like he's a strong man. Lies, 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 lies. Well, the biggest lie, or it seems like Trump told another lie, which is he said no more wars. But in a recent press conference, Carolyn Levitt said that Trump was going to take the next 2 weeks. It's always 2 weeks with him. The next 2 weeks to decide about
Remember,
whether
he
the
was supposed to
United
have a
States.
health plan in 2 weeks. That was like 5 years ago.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly, Phil, it was. But he's going to take 2 weeks to decide whether the United States is going to join Israel to go to war in Iraq. I don't want to just play some of this for you. I mean, it's like nails on a chalkboard watching this woman, but I'll do it anyway. I'm going to play the audio first and then bring the video on. Ooh, thought I was anyway. Give me 1 second.
Well, I will add. And he has been very direct and clear. Iran can and should make a deal. We sent a deal to them that was practical, that was realistic, or they will face grave consequences.
I've got to
Believe me,
interject.
the president is unafraid to use strength if necessary.
I got to interject.
And Iran and the entire world should know that.
I got to interject real quick because, and I just don't think the media is doing a good enough job with this. The Barack Obama brokered a peace agreement with Iran that while it wasn't perfect, right? Because no deal is perfect. While it wasn't perfect, it was preventing from Iran from gaining the ability to create nuclear weapons.
It was a damn good deal. Damn good deal.
Trump came in and destroyed the deal. And Iran started to sprint to get nuclear weapons. Now, why
as anybody in their situation would.
as anybody would. Why is that important? Because what we have learned with Iraq and North Korea is that as long as you got nuclear weapons, nobody's going to mess with you. You can do whatever you want to do, right? So if you're an international state, a country, or whatever, and you want to protect yourself, you got to protect yourself from the Americans, right? You got to protect yourself from the Israelis and all the other nuclear powered nations. So everybody wants it. So Trump kills the deal, never brokers another deal. Biden comes in and tries to reattach the deal that Obama had, but Iran was too far gone. They said, no. And Trump has the nerve to get in front of people talking about now you want to broker a deal. This is treasonous. Treasonous. And people are standing around like, why don't we have a deal? He did what he always does. He destroys what's there and then tries to recreate it because he thinks making a deal on no matter what it is somehow makes him look better. But all you've done is make the world less safe.
You know, Gavin Newsom, the way he put it, Gavin Newsom, which I thought was very insightful, he said Trump creates a problem, then he says he's going to go solve it. Okay? And yeah, I've talked about this before. People should understand the history of Iran before you make them into the great Satan. Not that they haven't done bad stuff. I've said this before, they had a democracy in the 1950s, but in 59, our CIA overthrew the democracy and installed a dictator who brutalized the people for 20 years. Why do you think that led to the Ayatollahs and all that? That's what did it. And then, as Nathan just pointed out, it's almost the same thing. Obama had a deal which my fellow Republicans didn't have the guts to support because they were afraid they were going to get primaried. It was a very solid deal. Remember, England, France, Germany, all these other countries didn't have a problem with it. And
even Russia, right?
Yeah, even Russia. And Trump says it was the worst deal ever made. I will make you a promise or guarantee. Donald Trump has no idea what was in that deal. He doesn't know what's in it. All he knows, Fox News was criticizing it. That's all he needs to know. And so, it may seem un-American to have some understanding or sympathy for Iran. And by the way, another point along those lines is Netanyahu he went to Congress, and they should, by the way, when Obama's president, I think it's totally wrong for Congress to allow a foreign leader to go and speak in front of Congress against an American president, which they should never have done. But he tried everything he could to kill that deal, the Obama deal. And why did he do that? Because he doesn't want them. He doesn't want a peaceful deal with Iran. He doesn't want that. He wants to bomb the hell out of them. That's what he wants to do. And I would suspect that the reason he chose now was because he was afraid Trump would cut a deal with them, and he doesn't want he doesn't want peace. He doesn't want a deal. He wants to blow them up.
Well, here's what I'll say. Not that I'm Israel's defender in any way, but I think in some ways you have to kind of understand that, Israel is sort of surrounded by a bunch of hostile neighbors. And so, as one might say, you sure as hell don't want your next door neighbor with a nuclear missile any more than the United States did. I mean, lest we not forget the Cuban Missile Crisis and what that was all about. The United States was saying, hell no, we're not going to allow you to put, ballistic nuclear missiles, within a stone's throw of the United States. So I think, to be somewhat critical of Israel and saying, hey, we got a problem with Iran having a nuclear weapon and we're going to do whatever we need to protect ourselves and stop it. I think, one would have to kind of understand that. The other thing I would say about sympathy for Iran is you can have sympathy for the Iranian people, but certainly the regime or the government that's running that country, which has sponsored terrorism and done all sorts of other things, I don't think that you can have much sympathy there.
But now, people need to know that our actions led to the Ayatollahs running that country.
Sure. Well, that's always the case. I mean, we always tend to go into these places and try to do regime changes and do what we do, and it never turns out right. And it won't turn out right in this situation if we choose to get involved in it. All we tend to do in these situations is make them messier and kick the can down the road for a little bit till the next dictator comes over and we can't control them like we thought we could in the first place. Saddam Hussein at one point, wasn't he a sort of a U.S. ally and appointment until he wasn't, right? And so these sorts of things are the way that they tend to play out when we, try to interject ourselves into these situations. But you're 100% right on the Obama deal. Trump just simply wanted to get rid of it because it had Obama's name on it, as he did with everything that he wanted to do. That's why folks shouldn't believe him when he says, hey, I'll get rid of Obamacare and replace it with something better. He doesn't have a plan, just like he doesn't have a plan with this Iran plan. If anything, the deal that he's trying to negotiate with Iran is probably at best a carbon copy of what he got out of with Obama, right? He'll just recycle what Obama had, try to slap his name on it and make it seem like it's a whole new thing. This is what Donald Trump does. And so we ought to be very concerned. I think as a nation, we ought to do everything that we can to discourage, any type of military involvement in this situation, because the last thing we need, you talk about national debt and government spending and all of that crap. The last thing we need to do is bury ourselves in another decades-long war that we don't need to be involved in.
Yeah, I think that I've heard a lot of people say like Israel is surrounded by hostiles, but I wonder if Israel is the hostile. And then, secondly, I think that Iran and other nations' desire to get nuclear weapons, I believe it's less about actually using them, but being able to enjoy the protections from aggressions from other nations like Israel. Because think it, Israel. If Israel is a nuclear armed nation, then what? If Iran is a nuclear nation, then Israel isn't just attacking them the way they are right now. So I think it's an issue of Iran saying we don't want to be bullied. And I think it's the issue of Israel saying that we don't want to have to not bully you. We want to be able to do what we want when we want. And you know what I'm pleased about on some levels is I'm starting to see a lot of people asking the questions about our allegiances to Israel that I used to ask 20 years ago. But people are questioning that relationship and what we get out of it. And what does that really mean? And really how much control via AIPAC does Israel have on our political system? There's a lot of questions there. But they got us running around talking about transgenders and gay folks. So that keeps us occupied. So we're not talking about the real transnational actors whose actions are filtering down to our lives on a daily basis. So I just feel like we got that whole thing wrong when it
Well,
comes
I
to
think there's
who's
a
the real
difference
aggressor.
between supporting the nation of Israel, which I do, versus supporting the current leadership that is a guy, Netanyahu, who's starting wars and continuing wars just so he doesn't get out of office. Because if he gets that, as you guys may know, he's got this kind of cabinet of 5 parties, and 2 of them are these right-wing kind of Ku Klux Klan type terrorists that just want to go and kill as many Palestinians as possible. And if he engages in a ceasefire with Gaza or doesn't do what he did to Iran, they're going to quit his cabinet. He's out, and he's also on trial for bribery, which he has to face if he gets out of office. So I have no love for this guy. I think he's horrible, but that's different from whether we support the nation of Israel. And I support it because, first of all, I think given what the Jewish people went through, not only the Holocaust, but throughout history, I think for them to have a homeland, I think is important. And at one time, not as much now, like you go to the 67 war, literally every one of those countries declared war on them. Okay. Every one of them, and by God's grace or their skill, they defeated them all. I think we also have to remember that it is the only democracy in that area. And I don't think always asking, what do we get out of it? That's what Donald Trump's always asking. What do we get out of it? Like, that's why we're not helping Ukraine. I think the United States should support democracies. I don't believe the regimes change stuff, but I think we should support democracies. In fairness, though, there are countries around Israel that are not necessarily all trying to undermine them. You got Jordan that they have a treaty with, and Egypt. So it's not quite the same situation it was in 1967.
Yeah, I think America should support humanity. And what's happening with the Palestinians right now is inhumane. It's a stain on the soul of every human being on this planet. Every last one of us is a stain on us, whether you've been there or not. I've met a couple of Israelis, and I don't mean to generalize, but they are just cut from a different cloth. There's something different there, not in a negative way. I'm not saying in a negative way at all. It's just there's a toughness, a grit,
Well, perhaps given the history of the Jewish people, that's
Yeah,
somewhat understandable.
yeah, I'm
Yeah,
saying, but it's palpable. At least I could pick up on it's palpable, and I support good people all over the globe. In their pursuit of happiness and humanity, and I don't care if it's democracy or whatever it is, black, white, green, makes no difference to me. We all got a right to live on God's earth. That's it. That's how I
mhm.
look at it. And it crosses over all political lines. Little babies who I've never met before have a right to grow up and live their life. And it doesn't matter
Yeah.
who their parents are and who they worship to. I don't have to agree with your religion, but you got a right to be here because I'm here. And I wish we looked at
and
it more
and
like that.
but that's part of the conflict I think that you have over there, Nathan. And I think, and again, look, I'm not any kind of scholar on sort of Israeli and Palestinian relations, but I've had enough conversations. I think with people on the Jewish side who talk about, like, one of the critical things is that hey, they do want to live in peace, but you're surrounded by people whose sole who one of their main things is your extermination. So exactly like what you said, the right to exist, the right to be able to live and be self-determining. Like, their enemies don't believe in that for the Jewish people. They're out to exterminate them and eradicate them. And I always say, and again, just to think about it, I mean, just think if African Americans were able to have their own nation state, and you were surrounded by people who didn't believe in your right to exist, or who still believed that you were three-fifths of a human being, and they were dead set on not allowing you to live peacefully.
I'm not sure if that's an accurate portrayal of the way
Well,
people feel, though.
but you can't. I'm just saying. I'm just telling you what conversations that I've had
Right.
with Jewish people, and how they interpret how the countries around them, Hamas and all of these others who want to see them exterminated. It's not, hey, let's live in peace. It's like, no, it's like, eradicate Jews. Like, that's where that's coming from. And so, how do you live
Is it?
in?
I
How do you
haven't
live?
heard that.
How do you? Yeah, I mean, that's. I mean, I don't feel you may be able to talk about that, but I mean, maybe we can have somebody from the
Yeah.
Jewish Federation on one
Yeah,
time
I
to
think they're
kind
going to
to
have a
sort of talk
completely
about
different
this.
viewpoint on that. That might be the
Yeah.
Israeli Jewish view of it, but that don't
I'm
mean it's
sorry,
true.
you're saying who's going to have a different view from what Kevin just said?
The nation states that are surrounding Israel. I mean, I don't think that the United States and Americans have a really true appreciation for the history, the context, and the depth of what those nation states' real issue is. It always gets filtered through what Jewish media and
Well, correct me if I'm wrong.
pro-American media
Again, I
says
don't want to
about it.
get into the weeds, but I don't. No question, you got Hamas and Hezbollah and Iran, who their purpose is they want to destroy Israel, and that's serious, and they need to guard against
Yes.
that. But as I said a few minutes ago, I forget who the other countries are around them, but they're pretty much. I think they have a treaty with Jordan. Jordan and Egypt were two of the countries that attacked them in '67 and '73. They're on very good terms with those two countries now. They're pretty much allies.
All I'm
Yeah, but
saying
but
is,
to your point though, Phil,
I
I
think
think
there's
it's
an
understand. I
information
think it would be
deficit.
under. I think
I
it would
think
be
there's an
understandable
information
to say.
deficit when it comes to the American public. And typically our views about what the struggle is in terms of the Israelis and Hamas and Hezbollah and whatever else, it gets filtered through pro-Israeli American media. All I'm saying is I can acknowledge that I don't know what I don't know. There is
Mhm.
probably a different view. If you talk to people who are so-called want to destroy Israel, and I don't really know what that viewpoint is. I don't know if it's justified or not justified. I don't have enough of an idea of the history of the conflicts to even know what anybody's motivations is. So I'm just not going to blindly accept what pro-Israeli American media tells me about Palestinians because it's probably distorted. It might be true, but all I'm saying is the possibility is that it is distorted. So we don't really know what's
Well,
really going
I
on.
would say that the other than Fox, just to understand the politics, the reason why Donald Trump is strongly pro-Israel it isn't because he cares anything about Jews. And the vote, and I understand this country is about 80% for Harris or whoever's running. He's doing it to suck up to the evangelicals, okay? And this reflects a lot of my friends, and that's okay. People who, and I would say primarily white evangelicals, for them, supporting Israel is almost second to none. when it comes to issues. Believe me, I've talked to them. Okay, that's part of his base, and that's who he's going after. Just so we're clear on that.
And he's got some really powerful people in his cabinet that are pro-Israel. So yeah,
it's
I get
interesting.
it.
He also has people who are anti-Semitic. He plays it both ways. He plays to the white supremacists, like in Charlottesville, and there's a couple of appointees right under Hegseth and under some of his other cabinet people that are on the record with blatant anti-Semitism, and let's be honest, that is part of Trump's base is white supremacists, and they hate Jews and they hate blacks. Okay, that's what comes down to it.
Yeah, these are complicated issues, and here's what I would say is this, and somebody said it in the comments. It's like one person's freedom fighter is another person's terrorist, and every now and again, Donald Trump will say something that sounds incredibly offensive, but there's a grain of truth in it. I don't know if you guys remember, I can't remember what interview it was, and somebody was talking to Donald Trump. They were challenging him about what one particular country did and how horrible it was. And Donald Trump said something to the effect of like, well, America does this stuff too. We kill people too. We do this stuff overseas too. And people were like, oh, a lot of people on the left too were like, oh, that's just patently un-American. But the reality is, Nathan, to your point, you're saying that, things are a matter of perspective. So you're saying like right now, well,
not just perspective, information.
Well, let me finish my point. Like you could be saying like, well, how do I know that Israel's not really the villain here because we're only hearing their side of things? Well, I'm sure if you go over to some other seas and you've seen what the United States has perpetrated in other countries, they're not going to share your perspective of the United States being this great, beneficial entity that's doing a lot based on some of the things that we've done in the interest of our own national interests, right?
Yeah, but the United States is not that. There's a lot of propaganda about the United States. We got blood on our hands for many millions of people have perished because of American presidents and psyops and intelligence dictators have people have been assassinated. Yeah, this country has blood in its hand like everybody else.
So I guess my point is that the heroes and villains are not always as clear cut as we always want to make them.
Yeah, that was my
point. The hero depends on a lot of times depends on your perspective, and that's why I say like these conversations that we have about whose side should we be on and this, that, or the other, that it's not as cut and dry, I think, as a lot of times we like to try to make it. This stuff is old. There's historical, like you said, there's a lot of information that we don't have, and you're trying to make the best decisions that you possibly can in a situation where you may never have all of the facts or all of the information for a variety of reasons, So it's complex stuff.
I mean, Israel won't even admit that they have nuclear weapons, even though we already know they have nuclear weapons, because if they do, that means that they will probably have to sign the Non-Proliferation Nuclear Act, which they don't want to sign. Every other nuclear nation has signed it. Why not Israel? Why do they get to flout that? Why are they lying about nuclear weapons? And
they're not lying. No, they're not lying. They just don't answer the question. They didn't deny it.
Same as a lie. It's the same as a lie.
I'm not so sure. They are always very close-lipped about anything going on military in their country. And again, given the history, I'm not so sure I can hold that against them.
I hold it against them because
I actually thought it was understood that Israel had nuclear weapons.
It is understood, but they don't admit it.
But they won't admit it. They won't verbally admit it. Like, think about what we're dealing with. They won't verbally admit it, but we already know they have it because they don't want to sign the Non-Proliferation Nuclear Act, or it might be the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Act, like everybody else, which says that even though you got nuclear weapons, it's some things you can't do and some things you can't do, right? So why are they skirting that? But everybody else is the villain, but you're doing this. That's what I'm saying. Like, it just don't add up. It doesn't make a lot of sense, but we shall see. I hope we don't go to war in Iran. I want to go to war on inflation. I want to go to war on homelessness. I want to go to war on, people making more money on their paychecks. I want to go to war on making sure that the wealthy pay their fair share. Phil sent an article in the chat about how now Republicans, once again, your party, Phil. Once again, your party.
Is this somebody named Phil, or are you talking about?
I'm talking about you, Phil. I'm talking about Phil Hemlich.
Okay,
Yo,
go
you
ahead. What's he
sent
say? What's he
no,
say?
you sent into our group chat. You sent a link about Republicans going after the inheritance tax. Remember that?
You talk. Oh, I sent that to you
Yeah,
guys.
you sent to us. That's what I said.
Yeah.
You
Oh
sent
yeah,
to
I'm
us.
sorry. Yeah. I'll talk about that. I'll be happy to talk
Yeah,
about that.
I was just switching. Like I want to go to war
Oh
on things like this and
yeah.
not
Oh
Iran.
okay. I'm sorry. Okay.
Yeah. So, why is this important, Phil? Inheritance tax. Why is this important? Why shouldn't they rescind it?
Here's the deal. If you're gonna cancel a tax, what's going to take its place? Okay, my belief is nobody likes taxes. Nobody does. There's no tax that we like. But the question is, since we have to tax to have money to run the government, what is the fairest type of tax? That's the question. And the income tax, relying primarily on the income tax, is very unfair, and it's actually, I think, less efficient, because as I mentioned, if you make $30,000 a year, you are going to pay more in taxes than a multimillionaire who just happens to put their money in real estate or municipal bonds. That is unfair. Now, if you compare that, okay, again, there's no good tax, but the reason I believe in the inheritance tax is because first of all, it takes money from somebody who's not here anymore. It doesn't deter people to want to earn more money, but it is fair because it's basically a wealth tax, not an income tax. And I can tell you, billionaires like Musk and all these others, they can do things so they don't show that much income. I'll guarantee it. But there are billions of dollars that go totally untaxed, except for when the inheritance tax is in effect. And basically, they had already watered it down, so almost nobody pays it. Now they just want to water it down even more. I actually think, as I've said before, that we ought to switch from an income tax to a wealth tax because I think it's a lot fairer. One of the points one of the points they make about what was I going to say? Well, I'll leave it at that. But I'm sorry, I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, you know what, Phil? I don't disagree with you. I just guess where I would say that um, I kind of see how you see it as a little bit different, but I also think like inheritance tax. Yes, you're taxing somebody who's no longer here, but it's also a tax on the people who are going to receive that inheritance. So that means less of the money that would have been coming to me as an heir. I don't get that now. So in
Oh,
a weird way,
exactly. That's why I say there's no good
so in a
tax.
weird
It's a
way,
question of what's
yeah.
the fair.
So in a weird way, it is kind of sort of an income tax. It's a tax on income that would be coming to me, not necessarily from a job, but certainly from a
But income
source
is money
that,
earned. Income is money
yeah,
earned.
Yeah.
well,
And
yeah,
by the way, the point I just forgot was that they like to say that, oh, it's unfair because you're taxing twice because it was already earned by the person who dies. Not necessarily. You think Don Trump
that's a good
Jr. and
point.
those guys earned the money they have? No, it was just passed down to them. And in fact, it's also what happened with Trump himself. So that argument that, oh, it's been being taxed twice doesn't hold up. Sorry, I interrupted
So
you,
so
Tim.
yeah, so again, the taxes. So the way you phrased it though is if you were taxing it on someone who was no longer here, then it would be a double tax. So the person who is so the person who earned the money,
Why is that a
right? So
double
say
tax?
because my money has already been taxed, right? And
No,
so
no,
when I
no.
die,
Not if you inherited. If you inherited me $1 million, you didn't earn that. You inherited from your parents, so it hasn't been taxed.
no. Listen, if so, say I'm your kid, Phil. As horrible as a thought as that is for us both,
Excuse me, I would
right?
be honored. Thank you, sir.
Okay, so you work all of your earnings that you've worked for during your life have been taxed, correct? For the most
No,
part.
well, all the money I have or what I've earned.
Yeah, the income that you've earned.
Okay, but you understand the difference between income and assets.
Wait a minute, I'm getting to that. So
You're making a
so
statement
every
that I'm trying to clarify because I may have let's say I have a whole bunch of money I didn't earn. I inherited from
No,
my
I
parents.
let's take that off. Let's take. I'm not
So
talking
you just
about that.
talk
I'm
about
talking.
the income.
Say your parents were piss poor and you didn't get anything from your parents, and everything that you have is everything that you've earned. all of that has probably, for the most part, probably been taxed. When you
Actually,
die,
no, I'm not trying to be nitpicky. That is not true. If you buy a piece of property and you don't, and you do not buy it, it has what they call a stepped up basis. Basically, there is no tax on the increase in that asset.
at any rate, we'll say not all of it, right? But the majority of what you have has probably been already pre-taxed income or earnings that you have. When you die, if you leave that to me, if by your premise it's a tax on the dead person, not the person who's getting it, it would be a double tax because I would
Well,
be paying tax in death for money that's already been taxed.
I hear your point. It's to me the point is not as much that the person's dead because you're right. His kids, want that money, so it's not just money that's not going to go anywhere. But the bigger point for me is it is simply fair, and I think you get more money by taxing wealth. And I don't just mean an inheritance when they die. I mean even on a yearly basis. I think it is a Milton Friedman actually. I think proposed that somebody did. I don't know, years ago, but it's a fair way and a more efficient way, I think, to spread the load. Because as I said, if you make a small amount of income, but you don't have any assets, which is actually probably the majority of people in the country, all those billionaires, they're not being taxed on all their wealth. They're only being taxed on what is earned income.
I see why they threw you out of the Republican Party now. That's
They
that
did not
socialist
throw
talk.
me out.
That's
It's
that
like Reagan
socialist
said,
talk
I
right
didn't
there.
leave them, they left me. And I am still a card-carrying Republican.
Not after they hear your tax plan.
That's all I got,
Being
fellas.
on this show is like taking truth serum. You know what I mean? I'm saying things that I'm going to regret for sure that I
Good,
ever said.
good. That's the way it should be.
I hope that Phil finds himself in a tight public office race sometime here in the next couple of years. I'm gonna enjoy watching that.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, you're gonna keep pull these tapes up. Hey guys, that's all I got. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Anything else
Yeah, thank you
on your
guys.
plate? Good.
No.
All right. To the audience,
All
thank you so much. Have a great weekend. We'll be back on Tuesday.